It was early morning, and I came downstairs as I usually do, and to make coffee. And I sat at the table and go through my email, and I saw a message from Heritage. And when I read it, it said that Carlo had a half brother. And my husband wasn't downstairs yet. He came a little later. And when he sat down, I said, "You have a brother." And he turned white. And I said to him, "Did you hear what I said?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, he said, "I can't believe it. I don't believe it." I said, "It says you have a brother in Sicily." I said, "They want to speak to you." And he said, "Oh my God, I can't believe this," he said. And then Angelo wrote to me and told me to download Skype, and I did. And the first time that Carlos saw them was on Skype, and he cried uncontrollably to a point that he had to go into the bathroom. He couldn't contain himself anymore. And then I spoke to Angelo and the sisters, and finally he came out of the bathroom to talk to them again on the phone, and they spoke quite a long time. And Angelo wanted to know uh, where did Carlo fit in to the brothers and sisters, um, and Carlo told him I was born in 1952, and this would make him the first child, and that's basically it at that moment. The night before, he couldn't sleep. He kept waking up, and I could feel him moving, that's so I knew. And he told me he was so excited. And then the next day, we kept watching because Angelo sent us his movements to come to New York, so we knew where he was. And so he was very fidgety, walking around the house and didn't know what to do. And I said, "Come on, let's go outside. We'll sit outside. Maybe you'll feel better." And so finally he did, and he couldn't wait. Couldn't wait. And there was so much excitement, and we finally saw the car come down the driveway, and I said, "Oh my God," I said, "here they are." And Angelo got out of the car and he said, "Where's my brother?" And my husband, I don't think I ever saw him cry as much as he did that day. He just sobbed and holding his brother, hugging, and and then they sat and they looked at pictures of the family, and they talked a little bit, but I could tell by watching him how much um, the curiosity in his eyes, looking at his sibling, to see the familiarity of his genes, to see someone that looked like him. You know, the eyes, the nose, and he was just in amazement, very much amazed. And when Carlo got very excited about something, he got very quiet. He wasn't one to talk a lot. He would just take it all in, you know. So it was a very exciting moment. In fact, the limo driver had Angelo told him the story, and so when he finally pulled in, and Angelo and Carlo met, the driver couldn't leave because he was so amazed to see two brothers for the first time in 66 years that they meet for the first time. Carlo was Carlo was not a big talker. He wouldn't. That's one thing I loved about him. He never went over the past to keep talking about things in the past. The only thing he discussed a lot was his father, Sam, his adopted father. He was not happy with his father. His father was very mean. Um, I met him in April of 1994, and until October 1994 is when he died. Okay, so my experience, when I would go weekends, they had a party every weekend, and the whole time my husband was there, the father would say, "Carlo, get that sprinkler's not working. Fix that. Carlo, someone wants a drink. Get a drink for the. Do this, or do that, and do this, and do that." My husband put his head down, would go do what he was told. Never answered his father back. He was such a kind, good person, very good person. Um, he would often say, well, towards the end, he said to me, "I don't know where he went, but wherever he went, I don't want to be there. I want to go somewhere else." I used to get very upset, but I wouldn't say anything because it wasn't my place. But I used to get upset the way he would talk to his son with a lot of disrespect. Carlo never talked about finding his biological family. I said to him one day, "Wouldn't you like to know who your mother is and your father?" And he said, "No, Deborah, why?" He said, "My mother gave me away, so she didn't care about me." I said, "No, that's not true." I said, "A woman doesn't have a child and forget that child." I said, "Your mother is probably thinking of you." And I said, "You think about it." I said, "If you want to find them, I promise I will find them. I promise." So he said to me, I said, back in the 50s, women would get pregnant and they would take them to an orphanage, let them have the baby, and then leave the baby there. And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Of course." I said, "You know how Italian people are." I said, "If their daughter got pregnant, that's a terrible thing." So he said, "Let me think about it." Maybe a month went by, and he came to me one day and he said, "Deborah, I'm ready. I want to find my parents." I said, "Okay." I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this now? So I got on the computer and I looked through Ancestry, and there I found a clipping of a man who headed the Italian orphans that were adopted to the United States. And his name was John Campanelli. And it said in there that if you think you were adopted from Turin, you may be part of this group. And I believe that Carlo was born there because when I looked for information, it was the only orphanage in Turin. So I wrote him a letter, and I didn't even tell Carlo, but I wrote him a letter and I said that I believe that my husband was one of the orphans from Torino and that we were looking for his biological family, and if anything he could do to help me, I would appreciate. It was a long letter, and I never heard anything, and I was a little disappointed. And then about maybe 2 months went by, and we were in a diner having dinner, and my phone rang, and it was from Milan. And I said, "Oh my God, Carlo, it's John Campanelli." And he said, "Really?" He just got like such shock, you know. And I said, "Let me answer." So I answered it. And John said, "Deborah, this is John Campanelli. I got your letter." And I said, "Oh, thank you so much for calling me." I said, "My husband and I are looking for his origin." And he said, "I understood that." And he said, "Well, it's very involved, but it can be done." So he said, but first, I have to see documents that your husband was from Turin. I said, oh, of course. I have all kinds of documents home. And we talked on the phone the whole time, from the diner all the way home in the car on the phone. I ran up the stairs so fast to get all the papers, and I read them to him, and he said yes. He said, Carlos from the orphanage in Turin. So he said, okay. He said, we have to work on this now. So he told me that he would be in contact with me within a short period of time to tell me more of what I would have to do. Carla was so excited. Actually, we both thought it was the end, that it was going to happen like this, but it was only the beginning, only the beginning. So that's when John explained that I would have to petition the courts in Turin, have to make up a paper, and John would submit it to the court to try and get the name of his mother. If the mother was alive, they would ask her if she wants to meet her son. But if she's deceased, then you would get the name of the mother because now she's gone. So you would actually then have the name of the mother. So they put the papers in, and that took a long time. It was over a year. And finally, I was getting very agitated with it because Carla would say to me, Debra, what's going on? And I said, well, nothing. We're waiting, you know. And he said, oh, my God, this is taking too long. I said, well, just be patient. And I said, you know, why don't we do DNA? I said, we have nothing to lose. Let's do a DNA test because I understand that a lot of people are finding each other through DNA. So he said, okay, I don't care. So I ordered DNA through Heritage. And that was the beginning of finding Angelo.